The emergency room at Mercy General Hospital was chaos incarnate on that rainy November night. Dr. Richard Hartwell moved through the controlled pandemonium with the confidence of someone who'd spent 25 years making life-and-death decisions. At 52, he was chief of emergency medicine, respected by colleagues, feared by residents, and utterly convinced of his own infallibility. "Dr. Hartwell, we have a pregnant woman in Bay 6, 32 weeks, severe abdominal pain, possible placental abruption." Richard glanced at the chart the nurse handed him, then looked through the curtain at Bay 6. A young black woman sat on the examination table, her face contorted in pain, one hand clutching her swollen belly. She wore a fast food uniform, burger joint, minimum wage, no insurance based on the paperwork. "How long has she been waiting?" Richard asked. 20 minutes. She just came in." "Triage her to County General." "We're at capacity." The nurse, Maria Santos, frowned. "Dr. Hartwell, she's in active distress. The baby could be in danger. County's 30 minutes away." "Then she should have thought about that before getting pregnant without proper insurance." Richard handed back the chart. "We have paying patients who need these beds." "Transfer her." "But that's an order, Nurse Santos." Maria looked at him with barely disguised disgust, but she took the chart. Richard had already moved on to the next patient, dismissing the pregnant woman from his mind as easily as he'd dismissed her from his emergency room. What Dr. Richard Hartwell didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that his decision that night would set in motion a chain of events that would save his life 10 years later. And the person who would save him would be the baby he'd just sentenced to die. In Bay 6, Jasmine Cooper tried to breathe through the pain that felt like her body was tearing itself apart. She was 23 years old, working 2 jobs to support herself and her unborn son, and she'd known the moment the pain started that something was terribly wrong. "Ma'am?" Nurse Santos appeared, her face apologetic. "I'm so sorry, but Dr. Hartwell has ordered a transfer to County General. I'm calling an ambulance now." "Transfer?" "I can't. The baby." Jasmine gasped as another wave of pain hit her. "Please, something's wrong." "I can feel it." "I know, sweetheart, I know, but the doctor won't treat you here." Maria's voice dropped to a whisper. "Between you and me, he's a racist bastard who thinks poor black women don't deserve the same care as his wealthy white patients. But I can't override him." Tears streamed down Jasmine's face, not from the pain. She could handle pain, but from the helplessness, the humiliation, the knowledge that her baby's life depended on someone who'd taken one look at her skin color and her cheap uniform and decided she wasn't worth saving. How long for the ambulance? 10 minutes, maybe 15 with this weather. Jasmine knew she didn't have 15 minutes. She could feel it. Something fundamental was wrong. Her baby was in danger. Every instinct screamed at her to get help now, not in 15 minutes, not in 30 minutes at County General. She made a decision. "Help me up," Jasmine said, gritting her teeth against the pain. "What?" "No, you need to wait for—" "I'm checking myself out. There's a fire station 2 blocks from here. Firefighters are trained for emergency births. They'll help me." "In this rain? In your condition, you'll never make it." "Then I'll die trying. Because staying here means my baby dies for sure." Jasmine slid off the examination table, nearly collapsing as pain shot through her abdomen. "Thank you for trying to help me. But I can't wait for someone who thinks I'm not worth saving." Maria watched her go, torn between her duty to the hospital and her conscience. Then she made her own decision. She grabbed a raincoat from the supply closet and followed Jasmine out into the storm. Dr. Richard Hartwell didn't learn about what happened that night until 2 days later when hospital administration called him into a meeting. "Dr. Hartwell, we need to discuss the Jasmine Cooper case." Richard searched his memory. The name meant nothing. "I see dozens of patients a night. You'll need to be more specific." The hospital administrator, Margaret Chen, slid a file across the table. 23-year-old pregnant woman. You ordered her transferred to County General 2 nights ago despite signs of placental abruption. If I ordered a transfer, there was good reason. We were at capacity. Actually, we had 3 empty beds at the time, and Ms. Cooper never made it to County General. She collapsed 2 blocks from our hospital and gave birth on the sidewalk in the rain. The baby wasn't breathing. One of our own nurses, Maria Santos, performed emergency CPR and saved both mother and child. Richard felt a flicker of unease. I wasn't aware. No, you weren't aware. Because you made a snap judgment based on the patient's appearance and insurance status rather than her medical needs. Margaret's voice was hard. Ms. Cooper is threatening to sue the hospital for medical negligence, and she'd win. This is a clear case of discriminatory denial of care. That's absurd. I made a medical decision. You made a racist decision, and it's not the first time. Margaret opened another file. Over the past 3 years, you've transferred or delayed treatment for 17 patients of color, all of whom had legitimate emergencies, all of whom ended up with worse outcomes because of delays in care. The hospital's legal team has documented a clear pattern of discrimination. Richard's face flushed. I've served this hospital for 25 years, and for 25 years we've overlooked your biases because you're technically competent. But we can't overlook this anymore. Ms. Cooper's case is high profile. The local news has picked it up. Social media is calling for your resignation. Margaret leaned forward. You have 2 options. You can resign quietly, or we can terminate you and publicly state why. Either way, your time at Mercy General is over. You can't do this. I'm the chief of emergency medicine. Not anymore. Dr. Patterson will take over effective immediately. Clean out your office by the end of the week. Richard left the meeting in a daze. 25 years. 25 years of his life gone because of one decision, because of one woman who should have been grateful for any care at all, who should have known better than to threaten a lawsuit she couldn't afford. He told himself he'd done nothing wrong, that this was political correctness run amok, that he was the victim here, not that woman or her baby. He told himself a lot of lies that day. But the truth he'd spend the next 10 years running from, was that he'd looked at a suffering woman and seen nothing but her skin color and her poverty. And he'd decided that made her life and her baby's life worth less than his convenience. 10 years later, Dr. Richard Hartwell was no longer Dr. Richard Hartwell. After losing his position at Mercy General, he'd found work at smaller hospitals, then clinics, each job a step down from the last. His reputation had followed him. The doctor who let a woman give birth on the sidewalk was how the medical community remembered him. He'd lost his medical license 3 years ago after another incident, another patient of color, another decision made too quickly, another bad outcome. Now, he worked as a medical consultant, reviewing insurance claims for a company that specialized in finding reasons to deny coverage. It was fitting, he supposed. He'd always been good at deciding who deserved care and who didn't. On a cold December evening, Richard was driving home from the office when his car hit a patch of black ice. The vehicle spun out of control, crashed through a guardrail, and rolled down an embankment. Richard's last conscious thought before his head hit the steering wheel was that he was going to die alone on a forgotten road, and no one would care. He was wrong about that, but he wouldn't know just how wrong until he woke up. Richard Hartwell woke up to the steady beep of a heart monitor and the antiseptic smell of a hospital. His head throbbed, his chest ached, and when he tried to move, pain shot through his entire body. Easy, easy. Don't try to move yet. A young black man in a white coat appeared in Richard's blurred vision, gently pressing his shoulder back against the pillow. As Richard's vision cleared, he saw the man more clearly, maybe early 30s, kind eyes, competent hands checking the IV line. Where am I? Mercy General Hospital. You were in a car accident. Rolled down an embankment about 3 miles from here. You're lucky to be alive, Mr. Hartwell. Richard blinked. Mercy General. Of all the hospitals in the city, he'd ended up back at Mercy General. The irony was almost funny. Almost. How bad? 3 broken ribs, concussion, internal bleeding that we had to repair surgically. You also went into cardiac arrest during the surgery. Your heart stopped for almost 2 minutes. But we got you back. The young doctor smiled. I'm Dr. Cooper, by the way. I'll be overseeing your recovery. Cooper, Richard repeated, the name triggering something in his foggy memory. That name sounds familiar. It's a common name. Dr. Cooper made a note on his chart. You should rest now. We'll talk more when you're stronger. Over the next 3 days, Richard drifted in and out of consciousness. Each time he woke, Dr. Cooper was there, checking vitals, adjusting medications, speaking in that calm, professional voice that Richard recognized from his own years of practice. The young man was good at his job, efficient, compassionate, everything Richard had once been, before bitterness and prejudice had rotted him from the inside out. On the 4th day, Richard was finally alert enough to ask questions. Dr. Cooper, how did you find me? The accident was on a back road. No one should have been there. Dr. Cooper pulled up a chair beside the bed. Actually, I was driving home from a late shift when I saw your car go off the road. I called 911, then climbed down to check on you. You were unconscious, barely breathing. I performed emergency CPR until the ambulance arrived. You saved my life. I did my job. Same thing you used to do, Mr. Hartwell, before you lost your license. Richard felt his face flush. You know who I am. I know exactly who you are. Dr. Cooper's voice remained calm, but something shifted in his eyes. I've known since you were brought in. In fact, I almost asked to be reassigned to a different patient, but then I remembered the oath I took. First, do no harm. It doesn't say first, do no harm unless the patient doesn't deserve it. It doesn't say first, do no harm unless the patient is racist. It just says, do no harm. I'm not a racist, Richard said automatically, the lie he'd told himself for years. No? Dr. Cooper stood up, walked to the window. 10 years ago, you refused to treat a pregnant woman in your emergency room. You took one look at her, young, black, poor, and decided she wasn't worth your time. You ordered her transferred to County General, even though you had empty beds and she was in critical condition. Richard's stomach dropped. Jasmine Cooper. My mother. Dr. Cooper turned back to face him. She almost died that night. I almost died. We both survived because a nurse named Maria Santos had more humanity in her little finger than you had in your entire body. She followed my mother out into the storm and saved both our lives. I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't care to know. You saw a black woman in a cheap uniform and made your judgment in 3 seconds. Dr. Cooper's voice was controlled, but Richard could hear the decades of pain beneath it. Do you know what it's like growing up knowing that a doctor looked at your mother and decided she wasn't worth saving? Knowing that you almost died on a sidewalk in the rain because someone thought your life didn't matter? I'm sorry, Richard whispered. Are you? Or are you just sorry because I'm the one keeping you alive right now? Richard had no answer to that. Because the truth was, he didn't know. Was he sorry for what he'd done? Or just sorry he'd been caught? Sorry he'd lost his career? Sorry that the consequences had finally caught up with him? Why did you save me? Richard asked. Why didn't you let me die? Because I'm not you. Dr. Cooper's answer was simple, devastating. Because when I look at a patient, I see a human being. Not their skin color, not their bank account, not whether they deserve my help. I see someone who needs care, and I give it. He paused. That's what you forgot, Mr. Hartwell. Somewhere along the way, you forgot that every patient is someone's mother, someone's son, someone's whole world. How is she? Richard asked quietly. Your mother, how is she? She's good. Works as a nurse now, actually. Inspired by Maria Santos. She wanted to be the kind of person who helps people, not the kind who turns them away. Dr. Cooper checked his watch. She's working the evening shift tonight. In this hospital, in fact. I think you should meet her. I don't think that's a good idea. I didn't ask what you thought. I'm telling you what's going to happen. You're going to meet the woman whose life you almost destroyed. You're going to see what she made of herself despite you, and you're going to understand exactly what you did 10 years ago. That evening, Jasmine Cooper walked into Richard's hospital room. She was 33 now, wearing scrubs with a nursing badge, her hair pulled back in a professional bun. She looked nothing like the terrified young woman he'd dismissed a decade ago. She looked at him for a long moment, her face unreadable. Hello, Dr. Hartwell. Miss Cooper, I don't know what to say. How about starting with the truth? Jasmine pulled up a chair. Did you refuse to treat me because I'm black? Richard opened his mouth to deny it, to make excuses, to rationalize. But looking at this woman, at her son who'd saved his life, at the chain of consequences that had led from his cruelty to their compassion, he couldn't lie anymore. Yes, he said quietly. I looked at you and saw everything I'd been taught to dismiss. Poor, black, uninsured. I decided in 3 seconds that you weren't worth my time, and I almost killed you and your son because of it. Jasmine nodded slowly. Thank you for being honest. I destroyed your life. No. Her voice was firm. You tried to destroy my life. There's a difference. Yes, what you did was terrible. Yes, I almost died, but I survived, and I decided that night that I would never let someone like you make me feel worthless again. She gestured around the room. I became a nurse. My son became a doctor. We help people every single day, people like you who maybe don't deserve it, but need it anyway. I don't deserve your forgiveness. You're right. You don't. Jasmine stood up. But I'm not forgiving you for your sake. I'm forgiving you for mine. Because carrying around hatred and anger for 10 years would make me bitter, would make me like you, and I refuse to let you take anything else from me. She walked toward the door, then paused. My son saved your life, Mr. Hartwell. Not because you deserved it, not because you were worth saving, but because he took an oath to help people, and he actually meant it. I hope you spend whatever time you have left thinking about that, thinking about what real compassion looks like, and maybe, just maybe, learning from it. After she left, Richard lay in his hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, finally understanding the full weight of what he'd done. Not just to Jasmine Cooper and her son, but to himself, to the doctor he'd once been, before prejudice had poisoned everything. Dr. Cooper came in later to check his vitals. She's remarkable, Richard said. Your mother, after everything I did, she forgave me. She did. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't erase consequences. Dr. Cooper made notes on the chart. You lost your career, your reputation, your sense of who you were, all because you decided one woman's life didn't matter. Is there any way to make this right? That's not for me to answer. But if you're serious about changing, about actually becoming better, then maybe start by asking yourself why you became the person who could look at a suffering woman and feel nothing. Richard nodded slowly. Will you help me? Help me understand? That's not my job. My job is to keep you alive. What you do with that life, that's up to you. Richard Hartwell was discharged from Mercy General 2 weeks after the accident. His body had healed, but something deeper remained broken. He returned to his empty apartment, to his soulless job denying insurance claims, to a life that suddenly felt hollow and meaningless. But he couldn't stop thinking about Jasmine Cooper and her son, about the compassion they'd shown him despite everything, about the life they'd built from the ashes of his cruelty. 3 days after his discharge, Richard did something he hadn't done in years. He went to therapy. Dr. Sarah Mitchell was a black woman in her 60s, which Richard suspected was not a coincidence. The hospital had recommended her specifically, and sitting in her office, facing her calm, knowing gaze, Richard understood why. Tell me why you're here, Richard. I almost died. And the person who saved my life was someone I tried to kill 10 years ago. You tried to kill him? His mother. I denied her medical care when she needed it most. She was pregnant, in distress, and I turned her away because she was black and poor. The words felt like poison leaving his body. And 10 years later, her son became a doctor and saved my life. How does that make you feel? Richard laughed bitterly. Ashamed. Guilty. Confused. How could they save me after what I did? Have you asked them? Dr. Cooper said he took an oath, that he sees patients as human beings, not categories. Jasmine Cooper said she forgave me so she wouldn't become bitter like me. Dr. Mitchell leaned back in her chair. And what about you, Richard? Do you see patients as human beings, or do you still see categories? The question hit him like a punch. Richard sat in silence for a long moment, really thinking about it. When had he started seeing people as categories instead of individuals? When had skin color become more important than suffering? When had his prejudices become more powerful than his oath? I don't know when it happened, Richard said quietly, but somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing patients. I started seeing problems. Threats, people who didn't deserve my time or skill, and I convinced myself it was about medicine, about efficiency, about making tough decisions. But it wasn't. It was about hate, about feeling superior, about punishing people for existing in a way that made me uncomfortable. That's a hard truth to face. It's the truth that cost me everything, my career, my reputation, my sense of self. Richard looked up at Dr. Mitchell. Can someone like me change? Can someone who's been that cruel, that blind, actually become better? Do you want to change? I don't know if I deserve to. That's not what I asked. Do you want to change? Richard thought about Dr. Cooper's steady hand saving his life, about Jasmine Cooper's dignified forgiveness, about Maria Santos, a nurse he'd never met, who'd had more humanity in one moment than he'd shown in years. Yes, he whispered. Yes, I want to change. Then that's where we start. Over the next 6 months, Richard worked with Dr. Mitchell twice a week, unpacking decades of prejudice and privilege. It was brutal work, forcing himself to confront truths he'd spent a lifetime avoiding. He read books about systemic racism. He listened to stories from people of color about their experiences with medical discrimination. He attended support groups for people trying to unlearn hate. And slowly, painfully, Richard began to see the world differently. He also began volunteering at a free clinic in an underserved neighborhood. He had no license, couldn't practice medicine, but he could help with administrative work, patient intake, whatever was needed. The clinic director, an older black woman named Dr. Grace Williams, had been skeptical at first. I know who you are, she'd said bluntly. I know what you did. Why should I let you anywhere near my patients? Because I'm trying to do better. And if I fail, if I show even a hint of my old prejudices, you can throw me out. But I want to help. I need to help. Dr. Williams had studied him for a long moment. One chance. That's all you get. Richard threw himself into the work. He saw the patients his old self would have dismissed, the poor, the uninsured, the marginalized, but this time he really saw them. Saw their struggles, saw their strength, saw their humanity. One evening, 6 months into his volunteer work, Richard was organizing medical files when Dr. Cooper walked into the clinic. Dr. Cooper? Richard stood up, surprised. What are you doing here? I volunteer here twice a month, have for years. Dr. Cooper looked around the clinic, at Richard's organized workspace, at the patient files. I heard you've been volunteering. Grace tells me you're doing good work. I'm trying. Why? Dr. Cooper's question was direct. Why are you really here? Richard set down the files. Because your mother was right. Carrying around guilt and shame was making me bitter. But unlike her, I deserved that bitterness. I earned it. So I decided if I couldn't make things right, I could at least try to stop making things wrong. Do you understand now? What you did to my mother? I'm starting to. Every patient I see here, every person struggling to get basic health care, I think about your mother, about how she must have felt that night, desperate and scared, and I turned her away. Richard's voice cracked. I can't undo that, but I can make sure I never do it again. Dr. Cooper was quiet for a moment, then he extended his hand. My mother forgave you. I'm not there yet, but I respect what you're trying to do. Richard shook his hand, understanding that respect, not forgiveness, might be all he ever got. And maybe that was enough. 2 years after the accident, Richard received a letter. It was from the State Medical Board. After reviewing his case, his volunteer work, and letters of recommendation from Dr. Williams, Dr. Mitchell, and surprisingly, Dr. Cooper, they were offering him a conditional restoration of his medical license. The conditions were strict. He would be on probation for 5 years, required to continue therapy, and could only practice under supervision at free clinics serving underserved populations. Richard accepted immediately. On his first day back practicing medicine, Richard was assigned to shadow Dr. Cooper at the free clinic. The younger doctor watched him carefully as Richard examined patients, checking his bedside manner, his judgment, his treatment of every person who walked through the door. At the end of the shift, Dr. Cooper pulled him aside. "You did well today. Really well. Thank you. That means a lot coming from you. I have something to tell you." Dr. Cooper pulled out his phone, showed Richard a photo of a young woman holding a newborn baby. "My daughter. Born last week. We named her Grace after Dr. Williams. She's beautiful. Congratulations. When she grows up, I'm going to tell her about her grandmother. About the night she almost died because a doctor decided she wasn't worth saving. But I'm also going to tell her about how people can change, about how the same person who almost killed her grandmother spent years learning to be better." Richard felt tears prick his eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because change isn't a moment, it's a practice. Every day, you have to choose to be better than you were yesterday. Every patient, you have to choose to see their humanity. Every time your old prejudices whisper, you have to choose differently." Dr. Cooper put his hand on Richard's shoulder. "You saved 3 lives today. Really saved them, with compassion and skill and care. The old you would have turned them away. The new you gave them hope. That's the practice. That's the work. I'll never stop doing the work, I promise you that. Good. Because the world needs doctors who see patients, not categories, who understand that every person who walks through that door is someone's whole world." Dr. Cooper smiled. "Welcome back to medicine, Dr. Hartwell, the real medicine, the kind that actually heals." 5 years later, Richard Hartwell stood in the same free clinic where he'd started his journey toward redemption. But today was special. Today, the clinic was being expanded, thanks to a major donation from an anonymous donor. Dr. Williams was giving a speech about the clinic's history and future. Richard stood in the back, content to be unseen, just another volunteer doing the work. But then Dr. Williams called him forward. "Dr. Hartwell, can you come up here, please?" Confused, Richard made his way to the front. Dr. Williams handed him a plaque. "This clinic saves lives because people like you show up every day and do the work. You're not the person you were 10 years ago. You've proven that through actions, not words. This plaque recognizes 5 years of dedicated service to our community. Thank you." The crowd applauded. Richard saw Jasmine Cooper in the audience, smiling. Saw Dr. Cooper holding his daughter, saw Dr. Williams nodding with approval, saw patients he'd treated, lives he'd touched, people he'd helped. He thought about the man he'd been, bitter, prejudiced, cruel. And he thought about the man he'd become, humble, learning, trying. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had taken years of hard work, painful honesty, and the grace of people who'd had every reason to reject him but chose compassion instead. As Richard looked at the plaque, at the community around him, he finally understood what Dr. Cooper had tried to teach him. Healthcare isn't about deciding who deserves help. It's about seeing the humanity in everyone and offering healing without judgment. 10 years ago, he'd refused to treat a pregnant woman. Today, her son was his colleague, her forgiveness was his foundation, and their shared work was his redemption. Some lessons come too late, but better late than never. Better to change than to stay the same. Better to spend the rest of your life trying to be better than to spend it making excuses for being worse. Richard Hartwell finally understood what it meant to be a real doctor, and it had taken almost dying and being saved by the very people he'd tried to destroy to learn it. If this story touched your heart, remember that every patient deserves dignity. Every person deserves compassion. Healthcare is a human right, not a privilege for the wealthy. Dr. Cooper saved his mother's attempted killer because he understood that healing isn't about judgment, it's about humanity. The most powerful medicine isn't in a pill bottle. It's in the choice to see every person who needs help as worthy of that help, regardless of who they are or where they come from. Change is possible, redemption is possible, but only if we're willing to do the hard work of becoming better than we were.